that's got to be almost a prerequisite to taking risks, is being able to actually have that sense of, okay, this is how I need to show up, right? Of like, before we're worried anything about like the actual circumstances, like this is how I'm going to approach things, and I have to be able to be honest with myself about like, what am I able to prioritize, what am I able to do. If you think for every $5 that we were collecting, we in 2020, in 2022, we were collecting one, and there just wasn't enough margins in it to begin with where we could weather that type of, compression. There was also an element of, kind of killing the golden goose. Very much everyone wanted a piece of the money, whether it was property owners charging, rent that was 10 times higher than comparable land for other agricultural uses, counties, state licensing fees, state taxes, county, cultivation and canopy taxes and fees. And, it all just added up where there was no way that we could compete on a, cost basis with someone who's in the black market and not paying some of those costs, and we didn't have the capital to kind of continue to bleed as the, basically prices fell below what the cost to produce. So, it was a big moment of accepting defeat, and really accepting that we failed at the overall vision, which was to create a successful cannabis company. Again, plenty of reasons and whatever, but the experience is one of like actually having to accept failure and say, you know what, like we did our best. We really did our best. And that, that is why I'm able to really take it in stride and feel like it's, one of those scars, and not just on the belt, but, I don't feel morally, spiritually, I know that we did absolutely everything we possibly could.
So I'm going to stop you there for a sec, because there's a lot in there, and, I definitely want to dive into kind of what's next, but I think there's a few things in there that stood out for me. The first one I want to go back to is just the sense of like, how do you make meaning of this, it's this entity, the business is like a baby, right? It's, the last 6 years you've dedicated everything into it, like you said, putting all your eggs in one basket, but not just in the risk or the gamble of it, but just really in the care and attention that you've put into it. And then ultimately it comes to this point where it's not working anymore, right? You got to pull the plug, so I definitely heard you bring the word failure into the conversation. And I think that's like a really interesting one for a lot of guys, because so many of us are, goal driven, right? So many of us, I feel like a lot of guys that I talk to, we have a mission in mind, and that could be a mission for a year, could be a lifetime mission, but nonetheless, we thrive when there's something that we're tangibly working towards. And inevitably in life, like things are going to not work out the way that we plan them to, or we're going to have to eventually come to a point where we have to say, it's time to pivot and put an end to this and start the next thing. Right. And so in this case, what was your process of dealing with that failure of like, this isn't going to work?
Oh man, that was I think if I'm diving into what the process was like, I think it started with some amount of denial, right? At first, it's like, just this kind of blind faith. It's like, we will find a way. This cannot fail. Like, we cannot fail. We're doing so well. Like, we're doing all the things that we should be successful, right? Like that's how the system is supposed to work. If you're really good at something and you do a really good job, like there's a way to make. But so denial moved into kind of like secretly knowing. And then like just kind of tasting it coming in the back of the throat, it's like, this might, there's, the plan is so delicate and we're starting to hang by that last final thread, and you can see it stretching out and out and out. And there's, the little window that we had to kind of slip through just kept getting smaller. And and then I think there's a lot of, there's kind of this way of constantly trying to spin the failure into some type of like building block for the next success, right? Like I think everybody, has read quotes by, I don't know, Winston Churchill or Abraham Lincoln or something, who's like, success is getting up 7 times when you fall down 6 or something like that.
Right.
And I believe that to be true. And also it's important, I think, not to rush it, rush to that sense of like, oh, it's okay. It's just like, and I really do firmly believe that, because I understand that I'm in this moment right now because of all of the things, not just the good things, but all the things, the good things, the bad things that have happened up until this moment, considered good or bad, are all necessary for this moment to exist.
Right.
And so, I know that looking back, it'll all kind of make sense on some level. And, it's just part of the wholeness that I guess has led to this beautiful life that I'm very, very grateful for ultimately right in this moment. So, but I just really wanted to just be with this failure. It was like I put so much into it that it just felt like, yes, like this was not what I wanted. What I wanted was for this to be wildly successful and to provide, financial freedom for myself and all my loved ones for the rest of our lives. Right. Mm-hmm. That was like the plan that was that I wanted to happen, and that I was doing everything I could to make happen. And that did not occur. Right. We did a great job. We did our best, things out of our control. That all of that's well and true, but the material facts are this, and so, I think the reason that it was important for me to really just be with that is because, while all things make sense in hindsight, like they still hurt and they're still painful. I lost my brother a few years ago, and that's another one where you're just like, we could put all the silver linings and spins on this that we want, but ultimately this just fucking sucks. This just really sucks. And, once you kind of have to just taste that and just be with that before any of this other stuff can actually get a grip emotionally. Like we could say it, but it won't actually, take root in our hearts unless we've allowed, the pain or the sadness or the disappointment to have its time in the sun. On some level.
Yeah, man. I think, talking about the sting, the suck, just that searing pain, whether it's, losing a loved one, whether it's a failed plan, whether it's, a curveball that comes in life that you now have to find a solution for. You know me very well. And most of the people that know me well know that I'm not very good at connecting to my emotions, and it's something that I've been working on, and very grateful for men's work, personal development, all that stuff, the TP way of being able to connect to those things more. But for so long, my story was there was no point in feeling the emotion, right? Because how I saw it, from a more logistical, pragmatic reason, it's like me feeling my emotion isn't going to get me closer to a solution, right? So in this case of a failed business, it's like me feeling or thinking about the sting isn't going to answer the problem of what am I going to do for money, right? However, especially in what I'm hearing you say, it's like it's almost like a necessary rite of passage to like feel whatever that sting, that emotion is, in order to be able to essentially move on or to move to the next step, next level. Because if we don't, then, in some way, shape, or form, we're kind of stuck in that purgatory there, even if we think we're being more solution oriented. Yeah. And risk is definitely a word that kept coming to my mind hearing you explain kind of the process of the cannabis business. And I would definitely describe you as a risk taker and risky person, and in the sense that, like, since we've been friends, I've witnessed you go all in on a lot of different things, both business wise and relationship wise, and where do you think your risk taking comes from?
I mean, I think, materially, obviously, I think both my parents were relatively adventurous. Mm-hmm. But I think, I consider them all to be what I think of as like smart risks, right? Mm. I explain to my kids, like, a stupid risk is something where you don't actually gain anything from taking that risk. The only thing that can happen is either nothing or something bad, right? And so, I think I have made risks. I have taken stupid risks, plenty of stupid risks in my life where the upside really wasn't worth the potential downside.
Right.
And so I think moving, trying as I get older to make sure that those risks, and then I've also learned that like risks are risks. It's not like I don't have this lucky charm where I hit more head than tails. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like I've definitely taken my fair share of like L's.
Yeah.
And so there's some degree to which, one gets a little bit grizzled, more cautious, prudent, I don't want to say scared, but when you've tasted defeat, it's, you want to make sure that you're not walking into it too hastily again. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I think that is a element of wisdom, but ultimately I think that, the amount we're willing to put into something is the amount we're going to get out, and so when the situations arise, I think being able to say like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this with all my heart, all my soul, all my will, all my money, all my time, and I'm just going to really give it my best. It unlocks some, power, I think, of, just the consistency, right? I think doing something is hard, right? Like doing something new, taking a risk, taking it all is hard. And so you have to really get your kind of whole being into alignment, whether it's starting a business or getting into a relationship or moving to a new place or learning something new, or, taking the risk to actually try to be a master of something, and put in the time it takes to learn, to master something. And I also think it's more fun. I think a life with lots of risk, I think can be tempered with a lot of love and a lot of, connection to people and, having a plan B and a plan C and a plan D and a plan E, right? It's in some level, just finding it's a way to also test the waters and see what's going to work.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's, I think of the men that I looked up to growing up, and these could be fictional men as well, in movies and books and stuff. And I think all of them had this element of risk, the badass, the guy that's like willing to step into a room with 20 guys with guns, and he's just got his one gun, and he's going to shoot them all up, or what you kind of get the picture I'm painting here. And I think our culture, it's something that's glorified for men, in a sense. It's one of the values or ways of being that, like, culturally we think men should be. And I think there's a lot of value to it. I think our culture doesn't do a great job talking about the loss that happens when taking risks as much as the glory, right? So, you just think of like, successful businessmen and they always focus on the story of like how they from nothing, they were able to make this bet or, invest in this thing and, make all this money and hit it big. And they never talk about the 20 other investments that happened beforehand where they lost like an enormous amount of money and were,
200 other people that failed, or 2,000 that didn't, that didn't work out for them.
Yeah, man. So I think, I think, you being able to share this, risk or really thing you invested yourself in, and then coming out, turning out, having an outcome that you really didn't want, right? You weren't planning for, however, not counting yourself down and out and, actually taking lessons from it is, I think we need to see more of it.
Yeah. Just because this was a failure doesn't mean I am a failure. Right. And I think that's somewhere where I'm really clear about that distinction. And I think, it's important to have kind of a strong ego in that sense and be able to separate from I know I did my best, and that's all I ask of myself. I know I did what I could. And again, there are things out of my hand. Just because I failed doesn't mean that I did anything wrong or that not taking it personally in a sense.
Well, that's a huge distinction. Just because this was a failure doesn't mean I'm a failure. And I'm super guilty of. I still, in those nights that I can't sleep, I'll think of, different things that have failed throughout my life that I've tried that, I'll still, to this day, even though I know I'm not a failure, I'll still be like, oh man, see, I'm not a good businessman. See, I'm not able to make a lot of money or whatever it may be, and really kind of start to attach myself to the failed opportunity or the failed thing that happened. So how do you make that distinction and keep the separation between the two?
I mean, I was just thinking, like, I feel like every time I miss a turn, I'm like cursing myself, I'm just treating, talking to myself so badly. So I think, I mean, I guess it's practice. I think it's also, I mean, part of just a larger vision of wanting, like knowing what's really our, like, what can we do? What's our purpose as a being, right? And it's, I think, to not get too metaphysical, is just to be a good person, to be loved, to actually experience love and peace and joy. And when you do something, do your best. I think, the 4 agreements from Don Miguel Ruiz is really a very succinct way to think about it. And one of the most important ones for me is just always do your best. Just don't worry about it. Don't worry, just do your best. Whatever you're doing, do your best. And then that is the ultimate liberation, because then you don't have to have this second layer of, am I a failure? Is this something about me? That how you approach each moment, because I think one of the important lessons is, like, we can't control the outcomes.
Right.
We can do our best, but we actually cannot control the outcomes. And very often the outcomes don't go the way we want, and so controlling the inputs is really the only, or our input, is really what we have to value ourselves on, and I think that's not to give everybody a pass, or even to give myself a pass, right? Because there's moments when I don't do my best, and that's when I really don't, that's when I feel bad, and that's when I really have to do some soul searching, or, and it's more painful in a way to look back on something and be like, I really half-assed it. This one's on me,
Yeah.
It's not on the things that are out of my control. And so,
yeah, that level of, to me, that's like the truest meaning of integrity there, is like, can I look back and say that I did my best, or be honest and be like, fuck, I half-assed that, or I did not do everything I could. And I definitely agree. That's way more painful than, prices of cannabis bottoming out, because, at a certain point, there's always going to be things that we cannot control. They're just completely out of our control. And, I think in that self-reflection, to me, that's the distinction between being a victim and also just being able to state what's mine and what's not mine. Right. And if we can't do that, then we're kind of always in that victim role of like, oh, well, it's that thing's fault, it's their fault, or I couldn't control it, and kind of very easily giving ourselves a pass.
Yeah. Well, I think, what you're alluding to, that sense of agency, going back to what you were saying about taking risks, I think, after what you said, that's got to be almost a prerequisite to taking risks, is being able to actually have that sense of, okay, this is how I need to show up, right? Of like, before we're worried anything about like the actual circumstances, like, this is how I'm going to approach things, and I have to be able to be honest with myself about, like, what am I able to prioritize, what am I able to do, and if I am not competent or not capable of actually separating out when, like, what's my responsibility, right? And when am I just pretending to be a victim? Like, if you're someone who likes the victim narrative, you're not equipped to take risks. It's impossible. You'll never win, right? Yeah. Because as soon, like, the whole idea is to find something to blame, right? And so, it's only when, I guess, we decide that it's on our shoulders and we're going to do our best, and ultimately that's where the buck's going to stop, is when you really get to take a risk in a powerful way.
Yeah, that, I think that's one thing I've always seen with you ever since, we met each other my freshman year of college. I really see you as, whatever situation you're in, taking on that role of the buck stops with me, and I think that sense of agency and that sense of really, like, giving it your best, But it's also, I've always viewed it as leadership, right? And yeah, I think it's really interesting. You do that, whether it's whether it's a cannabis business, whether it's searching for land to have community on, or like the dishes being done by in the kitchen being cleaned by the end of the night. There's always this sense of like the buck stops with me. Now, do you think you got that from parents or something that was instilled in you when you were young? Is it a fear of something else? Like how do you get there?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's definitely a choice, right? It's a choice. It's actually like a key to a lock. And the door that opens is the best life, right? Because then nothing is outside of my control. But that's the key, is to say the buck stops with me. Ultimately, I'm responsible for all of it, the good, the bad, the success, the failure, the things that are completely out of my control. I'm still responsible for how I'm experiencing, how I'm showing up to it, right? And, as far as education, I think, doing the landmark curriculum is a place where I really learned it in a very material way, like where it's kind of fleshed out, like understanding that actually the whole thing the thing that is my life is the story I'm telling myself about a number of things that have no meaning inherently, right? That is what is ultimately my life. And so understanding that voice of that author is me, that is my choice. What's the story that I'm telling of meaningless events, right? And so it's a great power, right? It's Absolutely. A great power, but it's a harder life. I don't know. I think it's easier on some level because you're not constantly, but it just requires a bit of like willpower. I think that's really, for me, spirituality. That's where it actually, that's why it matters. That's why I think, all these different practices, whatever people do, that I did meditation and, vision fast and just whatever I could to try to be a stronger spirit, to have a more kind of clear sense of agency and willpower and